Thank you for joining the Best Practices for Plan Submissions training. We hope that this training will guide designers to include pertinent information in erosion and sediment control plan submissions so plan reviewers can efficiently review plans and reduce the amount of comments necessary. This training was developed because plan reviewers found that submittals had similar errors and misunderstandings. This training assumes some basic understanding of ESC regulations and practices. I recommend watching or attending the other overview trainings prior to this one if you are not familiar with these. The objectives of this training are to learn what specific information plan reviewers are checking, learn the most common plan reviewer comments and the most common errors and how to avoid them, to review commonly misunderstood parts of the ESC manual and the submission process, to provide resources and good examples of plan submissions. Overall, the goal of this training is to improve plan submittals to create a more efficient review process. Not everything in this training will be required. It may just be helpful for a plan reviewer to clearly understand the plans. Additional training can be found at the website at the bottom of this slide. A plan reviewer will typically first go through a project and review the plans to be sure they understand the overall project. The drawings should be clear and easy to understand, and all required pieces should be included. The reviewer will then go through and check the ESC measures and make sure that they meet design requirements. First, let's go over some of the basic plan components. They're summarized on this slide. These won't be required on every project, but they are generally required and should be checked by the designer to ensure if they apply, they're shown on the plans. We'll go through these by looking at some examples. Here's an example plan sheet that is very easy for a plan reviewer to read. Everything is clearly marked with different line types and hatching in the legend. The line types are different weight, and they're easy to distinguish the type from each layer. The text is also clear. Here are examples of plans that are difficult to read and difficult for the plan reviewer to understand what is being represented. Overlapping layers that obscure the information, such as spot elevations. Multiple lines with the same thickness and type make it difficult to know what the lines are representing. And illegible references are also not allowed on plans. The basic components that are required are an approval stamp area. So this area must be 7 inches wide by 9.5 inches tall and have a 1-inch margin. There must be a project narrative on the plans describing the basic project and what is encompassed in the work. There must be a vicinity map with scale and location, north arrow also. The address, a lot, and square must be on the plans. If there is a PE or an architect preparing the plans, there must be a signature and stamp. The north arrow can be on the plans or on the title block. There must be a graphic scale that is correct and matches the plans. There's a legend required, and all line types, all hatching and symbols that are shown on the plan should be in the legend and should be consistent between the legend and the plans. The street and alley must be labeled, so you can see here on this plan they've shown not just the lot where the work is being done, but also the vicinity. You can see a bit of the area around, and part of that is showing what the adjacent street or alley name is. The property line must be included and indicated. And then any trees on the site or near the site, within or around the LOD, must be shown. You must also show the diameter at breast height, or the DBH, and the critical root zone. The critical root zone is not the same as the structural root zone. The critical root zone is defined as 1.5 feet of radius per inch of DBH. Here's another way of depicting some of those same elements. So they've shown here symbols in the legend and plans. So these are different symbology they've used. They're using their own, but that's fine as long as it matches what's on the plan and what's in the legend. There's a north arrow here shown on the plan itself rather than in the title block. The streets are labeled, the public alley. The address, lot, and square again is shown, signature and stamp as well. And there's a graphic scale shown on the plans that matches. This is one error that we see quite often, where there's a graphic scale and the scale that's given is not accurate. It doesn't match the actual scale that the plan is showing. It's been rescaled and the scale hasn't been adjusted, for example. The property lines are indicated, and again, the line type for the property line is shown there in the list of symbols in the legend. Here's another example with some errors on it. So you see here there's a legend that doesn't match the symbology and the line types they're using in the plans, right? This is just a standard symbol that's pulled and put on the plans, but it doesn't match the symbols they've actually used. This is incorrect and will result in a comment from the plan reviewer. The property lines are shown, so they've used their own symbology here for the property lines, but again, that line type is not shown in the legend. They've shown the street labels, which is good. Here we're showing some examples of key elements to pay attention to when you're submitting the plans to the surface and groundwater system, or the SGS. This is the main interface through which you'll submit your plans for erosion and sediment control. One of the questions in the SGS is, are there special or heritage trees? So if there are special or heritage trees, these are defined by DOEE Urban Forestry Division. And if they are on the site, you'll answer yes. If there's an answer of yes in this box, a further box will pop up asking if any of them are going to be removed. These are helpful questions for us coordinating with UFD as plan reviewers to make sure that we're aware of where the trees are and if they're being affected by the construction activities. The land cover must be input, so you can see here the total project area is a composite of the 3 different land cover types, well 4 different land cover types really, natural, compacted, and impervious surfaces. Oftentimes we see natural cover input when it is actually compacted cover. So natural cover really only refers to forested areas and meadow areas that are not actively managed, that aren't landscaped. So most of the area that you think of as green space is, turf areas and landscaped areas is actually compacted cover. The project description should include all of these key project details, including the cost of the repair, alteration, addition, or improvement, the building footprint, the assessed building value, and the estimated start and completion day, as well as the project description. The construction information should include the engineer or architect or whoever is developing the plans and contact information so we can get in touch with the designer. You should also input all DCRA building permit numbers and all DDOT TOPS permit numbers for tree removal. Now let's look at some of the ESC measures that need to be shown on the plans. They're summarized here, and again, these might not all be applicable to your specific plan, but they should all be thought of and considered and to see if they apply in your situation. First, let's look at the demolition plan. So many designs are going to require some demolition on site. You have to show the limits of disturbance on all plan sheets, so that includes the demolitions plans and all erosion sediment control, so the plan reviewer can see across sheets is all of the work proposed, including the demolition work, included within the LOD. It's important to remember that erosion and sediment control measures must be in place before demolition happens. So in this case, this designer has included a separate demo ESC plan and developed a sheet where this phase of the construction has its own separate ESC plan. You can also integrate the demolition work into the sequence of construction so that you're clearly communicating that the ESC measures are going to be in place prior to any excavation, any sort of demolition work being performed. And if they need to be adjusted, it might make sense to prepare a separate plan if it's significant enough of a project that the ESC is going to change substantially from the demo to the construction phase. One thing you need to show on the plans here is the special and heritage trees. So as we mentioned, you show the critical root zone and the diameter at breast height of the trees. You also have to show tree protection measures. So if there is a special or heritage tree on the site, it's required to be protected. And that's not just protecting the trunk and the branches, that's protecting as much of this critical root zone as possible. If there are trees on site where there is some impact to the critical root zone, you may be asked by the plan reviewer to coordinate and demonstrate coordination with D.UFD. And so you can add a note on the plans, and the reviewer may request, typically email correspondence suffices for this. Now getting into some of the other ESC measures that must be shown on the plans. You can see they've shown, again, the tree protection measures. They've shown the stockpile area, and the stockpile area has perimeter controls around it. There's inlet protection. In this case, they've shown an inlet on the site that needs to be protected, and then there's an inlet that's down, not shown within the scale of this plan here, but down at the nearest downstream road inlet, and they've shown that with a note. You must show grading, so spot elevations or contours. This is important for showing where runoff is going to occur and in which direction. And the reviewer needs to know this information so that they can check to make sure that the perimeter controls and the other structures, the ESC measures in place, are in the correct locations and are appropriate to the site. The limits of disturbance must be shown, and again, they've shown here the limits of disturbance line type in the legend. It's consistent with what's on the plans. And the perimeter controls shown around the perimeter at the limits of disturbance, and the type of perimeter control specified there in the legend. In this example, we can see here that they've shown the LOD and the perimeter controls in the legend, but they're not on the plan view. So this is very important to make sure that you're indicating clearly where the perimeter controls are located and that they're appropriate to the project. Here's an example of some more elements that must be shown. These DOEE general notes, there are 15 of them, must be shown on the plans. These can be found on the DOEE website, and they are copied and pasted here in this case. You must also show the predominant soil type, and it must match what's in the SGS. We'll go over a little bit later how to obtain this from the NRCS website, but you can also grab it from the SGS as well. And this must be on the plans as well as in the SGS. The perimeter controls must fit the site conditions. So you can see here they've specified erosion control sock or filter sock. And this is because the location they've specified it for is paved. Tree protection must be shown on the plans with the critical root zone. You can see here this tree protection, this rectangle, is likely drawn to the extents of the tree pit in the public right-of-way. So you want to put the tree protection measures to the maximum extent possible of the critical root zone. So even though this critical root zone is shown to extend, it would be helpful to know what's going on in that situation. Is there a sidewalk stopping the extension of this tree protection any further? The disturbed area and cut and fill volumes must be somewhere on the plans. And there must be a stabilized construction entrance. The stabilized construction entrance should be shown and indicated in the legend as well. And the appropriate detail must be added to the details sheet. Again, they've shown here the stockpile with perimeter controls. And the LOD must include all work in the public right-of-way and utility work. So it's not just limited to work on the site, you must also show what is happening in the public right-of-way and any utility work. Here's an example of a stabilized construction entrance. On these smaller projects, Oftentimes it's very difficult to get a 30-foot long or a 50-foot long stabilized construction entrance. The minimum is a 30-foot long, unless it's a large site, then it's a 50-foot long stabilized construction entrance. If you cannot fit the complete sized stabilized construction entrance, you must note on the plans how you're going to accommodate. Perhaps you're going to start with a longer stabilized construction entrance and shorten it as construction progresses. Possibly you're going to have to use existing paved surfaces, that sort of thing. So anything that is not the standard 10-foot wide by 30-foot long stabilized construction entrance, you should specify and clarify what is going to be used to ensure that sediment does not leave the site by vehicular traffic leaving the site. Another issue we see sometimes is that there will be limits of disturbance that are drawn that aren't very realistic, right? In this case, you can see in both of these cases, there's a narrow walkway through which the construction access is going to occur. So you can see here on the left side, there's a stabilized construction entrance at the rear of the site, and all construction access is going to happen through this narrow 3 or 4 foot walkway to do all the work at this building in the front. This area in the middle here is said to be outside of the LOD, but it's very unlikely that that construction could proceed as planned without that disturbance. Same thing on the right. Construction access is at the rear, the staging area is shown, material storage, and all of that's going to be transported through this sidewalk area without disturbing this turf area in the middle. Same thing on this adjacent lot. I think on this project on the right, what they did after a reviewer comment was they flipped one of these projects, they flipped the right side so that these two sidewalks were next to each other, and then they were able to have an 8-foot wide construction access, which was a bit more realistic for the equipment that they were going to be bringing on site. Sometimes there's not space on the site to stockpile. In those cases, you can add a note specifying that everything will be removed immediately, that there will be no on-site stockpiling. And oftentimes we'll get an LOD that's close to that 5,000 square foot threshold that might push the project into requiring stormwater management. So we oftentimes ask that you add a note specifying that the contractor be aware and strictly adhere to the delineated LOD, and make them aware that if they go outside the approved LOD, the inspector has the authority and may halt the project until stormwater management requirements are resolved, which could significantly delay your project. So reviewers may ask for that in cases where that LOD is close to the 5,000 square foot threshold, or the site conditions are such that it is not easily defined, or there's some area that could potentially get disturbed, as I showed in some of the previous examples there. The DOEE general notes must be on the plans, as I showed. Dust control notes also must be on the plan. So this is section 9.1 of the ESC manual. The area of disturbance and the volume of cut and fill must be on the plans. The soil type, this is another way of showing it. So instead of showing everything on the plan sheet, oftentimes designers will put a separate sheet of specifications and notes, as they've done here. So the sequence of construction must be on there somewhere, specifying when perimeter controls, when other ESC measures will be put in place and taken away, what sequence of construction will happen when different operations will occur, and how they will relate to the movement of materials, disturbing of land, and erosion sediment control measures. Here's another different way of representing the DOE general notes. They've typed out the 15 notes here rather than copying and pasting the table. And they've typed out here the disturbed area and the volume of cut and fill. So as I mentioned, I would show you here on the USDA web soil survey, there is probably a number of ways to get to this information. This is just one of them. So if you go to this website here, I have the link shown on the final slide of this presentation. You just start the web soil survey. You search by the address to find your site. You go up to this Area of Interest tab on the top and define an area of interest by rectangle or however you want to do it, and get this little rectangle around the project site. You then go over to the Soil Reports tab and view the soil report. So you can see that there is a general description of the predominant soil type shown there. And that is the predominant soil type that you would then put on your plans. You can also get that information from the SGS. Somewhere on the plans, you must have vegetative stabilization notes. So this is section 2.10 of the ESC manual. One key thing to include with these vegetative stabilization notes are these tables, completed table 2.3 or table 2.4 showing the temporary seating, and table 2.5 showing permanent seating. Table 2.3 and 2.5 must be completed and filled out by the designer. And table 2.6 shown along the bottom here, it can be helpful in filling out those tables, especially table 2.5. So just make sure you have on here a completed table 2.3 or 2.4 showing the temporary seating and a completed table 2.5 showing the permanent seating. Here are some examples of the ESC relevant legible details. Remember, we can't have illegible details. And there are a number of details that require a first and a second sheet. So silt fence is an example of this, where the first sheet shows the general practice and the design of it, and then the second sheet shows some of the criteria. As I mentioned before, the grading must be shown on the plans. One of the reasons for that is that silt fence has a maximum allowable grade or a maximum allowable distance for different grades. So that's shown on the second sheet here and must be shown on the plan. Let's talk for a moment about some of the perimeter controls. One thing we'll often see is straw bale dike used as a primary mechanism or primary perimeter control. That's not recommended, and oftentimes what we see is straw bales just used as straw bales sitting on the surface. If you look closely at the detail specification from the ESC manual, you'll see that straw bale dike actually requires trenching and staking. That can't be done on pavement, and you can't trench within a tree critical root zone. So this is not an appropriate perimeter control for paved or tree critical root zone areas. In paved areas, you can use silt fence on pavement. So there's a detail here showing the filter sock, showing the silt fence on pavement. And then you can also use filter sock. So there are two different ways to implement filter sock. The first sheet showing staked into compacted cover ground, or the second sheet showing a silt fence or filter sock on pavement where they're using block to secure the filter sock in place. Within the critical root zone of a tree, you can use this detail here showing tree root protection with silt fence. This is the preferred method. You can also use filter sock because neither of these methods require trenching. When you receive comments from a reviewer, you're going to respond and make corrections to the plans and provide a comment response letter to the reviewer. It's very important that each comment be addressed in the comment response letter, and it's also very helpful to specify the location in the plan set where that comment has been addressed. This eases the review for the reviewer and speeds your approval process. Sometimes comment response letters come back without much information. It doesn't indicate where the information was added. It doesn't help direct the reviewer to quickly verify that, yes, this comment has been addressed. So directing with specific locations, more descriptive responses will help the reviewer speed through your review. There are a number of common comments that you may receive from a plan reviewer. I've shown them here on these 3 slides that follow. I won't go through these slides in extensive detail, but they're shown here for your review. These may not apply to your particular site. They're just shown as a helpful reference just to check through that you're making sure all elements are covered in your design. There are a number of resources available. They're shown here. These websites can be used to find further information that may be helpful in preparing your designs.